Going live. We're live. Yeah, okay, good. Tell us if you can hear us. We've got a nice little crew joining us. Mike, David, the White Wicks are there. Robin Weston, Alice Sarah. Good. All the old favourites. Right, let's get down into the chat. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Rail Now. We've kicked off. Ish, as ever, a nice soft start. How's the sound? Are we all right? Andrew, we have Andrew White here.
Hello.
Hello. Right, I'm going to pull your mic up a little bit, I think. There we go. They can hear us.
Hey.
Good. Happy days. Oh, we're here. Hooray. let's get us side by side. We've hello. Look, I've just come out of the shower, literally. We're
I just finished tea. Look, see, look, that's my dinner.
Oh, lovely. Yeah, that's it. Nice. I'm about to start drinking, not that I want to steal the format from Dr. David Turner, but I happen to be drinking some Brewdog, which is technically my local from when I used to live in Inverurie, but it certainly is not anymore. But before I do that, I'm going to drink some water. Andrew, how are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
I am dehydrated, but other than that, I'm in reasonably good nick. There we are. We've got lots of people saying hello. Marvellous. It's happening. I think everything's set up. This has been, as ever, it's been a mad rush. Wednesdays are always a mad rush, but that's fine. We like to keep everyone on their toes.
It's informal.
It is informal. Well, it's a chat. It's a natter. You know, yeah. It's a natter. How's your neck of the woods? What is it? I mean, you're not that far from me, and it's a bit dingy in York.
It's been a little bit grey and miserable for most of the day today. We were supposed to be going out to do some filming today, so we decided to postpone that. But we're hopefully going out. I think Friday looks if the weather moves. This is what you have to do, obviously, when you're filming. You have to keep checking all the weather and see whether. I don't mind going out in the rain, but it's when you've got other things organised and that it's nice to do it in some nice sun.
Yeah. Particularly, yeah. Particularly if you've got one or more people in the team, they might not be quite as eager to get soaked, and they might not be quite as eager to get their kit soaked. But actually, I dare say you and the team, the Walks Around Britain team, are seasoned pros at managing wet weather, because you wouldn't successfully film a walking program in Britain without being able to deal with a bit of rain.
It's as I say, we don't mind going out when it's raining. And of course, if you're going further afield, at the moment we're trying to obviously still, until we can get past that point where we can stay overnight places, we've had to keep more local. So it's basically, our filming in the last sort of 2 months has been all pretty much Yorkshire and North Derbyshire, things we can get to sensibly in a day. So I'm based in the lovely railway town of Doncaster, and so that's been sort of trying to keep that more central, more close to home. But then when we're going further afield, I mean, if you're going to go and you've arranged everything to go to the Isles of Skye, or you're going down to Scilly Isles or wherever, you're pretty much faced with whatever weather there is when you go.
Yeah.
So you can't really turn back and say, well, actually, we'll not bother now.
You haven't.
The showers, we can't do that. You've got to go off and do whatever it is. So.
Yeah, and indeed, walking around on bits of railway line happens to be relevant for today's natter. So I think without further ado, let's kick things off. So welcome one and all to this week's Rail Natter. And there we go, the InCity 225 fading out. Here we are, back side by side. As ever, Andrew, you don't get to hear the sound, but I promise that there is sound for the intro for everyone, all of our viewers enjoying the Natter Live. Currently, there's a sweepstake going on in the chat about how long this episode's going to be. Melanie Osborne has suggested 2 hours 5 minutes. Melanie, we're keeping it tight. We're keeping it tight. It's getting unwieldy, and much as it is a nice natter,
they seem to be growing longer, don't they?
Yeah, they are.
Elastic timelines. It's kind of like we've got built-in recovery time, haven't we, into the timetable? Obviously,
We do, but in this sense, we haven't got any. This is where it's useful to have some time pressure, because if there's no time pressure, you end up. Me and Charlie just chatted for a bit. We reached the point where you could say we chatted for hours viably, which indeed we did. No, it was good. It was good. We have lots of people joining us for this little chat. So I think to start with, let's talk about. Let's go into. Let's wait a second. I can do this more pro than this. I'm lining up some pro stuff. Wait a minute. Watch this. Let's talk about the news. Oh, except that I have to be in here for it to move. I always forget that. There we go. Right. So, everyone who's on the chat should recognise where this is. This is the lovely Colton Junction. Yeah. So the reason I've put this up, this little video. Oh, it's me moving around. Look, what am I filming? The reason I put this video up is because Network Rail have finally announced they're going to start filling in the gap, the electrification gap between here and Leeds. Well, they're not going to go to Leeds. They're going to start by just wiring up to Church Fenton, which is not that far away, in honesty. And it's going to take them 3 years, which is quite something. But I presume that the reason it's taking so long is because of the negotiation of access. So the actual building it does not take it does not take years and years. Actually, it doesn't take very long at all. The challenge is that the East Coast Main Line is very, very busy, and closing it for any length of time is doesn't make you very popular as Network Rail. So anyway, so the bit I don't know how well you can see this, Andrew, but you can see you've got the beautiful sort of equal splits here on the fast lines, but the two original straight lines that are kind of in the right hand part of the shot are the Leeds York lines, and those aren't electrified. Once you kind of get to the underbridge, just a bit further on, I think the wires stop pretty rapidly. Yeah, so people were asking, why are you wiring to Church Fenton? What's the point? Well, I think for the TransPennine stuff, basically it means that they won't have to run pan down through York. So they've currently got a load of bimode trains. They have to run on diesel mode in York, which is a bit rubbish, particularly from an air quality perspective in York Station. York Station, considering every single track is wired, York Station is really dismal from an air quality perspective, because so much diesel stuff goes through there. So every little helps from that perspective, let alone the benefits from a speed and acceleration and capacity perspective of running on electricity on the run up the hill towards Church Fenton, because it is actually a bit of a hill. Anyway, so that's the news. Not very much news other than that. What else? Yeah, that's it, really, from a news perspective. But we'll come back to Colton Junction and the Selby diversion shortly. But to start, I'll tell you what, while we're nattering, Andrew, would you like me to just blast into your intro video? Hopefully the sound works on this.
Yes, yeah. This is just basically to show people, explain to people what it is that I do, if you don't already know. So that's basically. So
yeah, so there's a nice freight train approaching. So hopefully the sound will work. We will see shortly. I think it will. It's got desktop audio. We should be fine. There's a nice. I'm just going to let this freight train come through shot because it's quite. There we go. That's nice, isn't it? Anyway, rail freight is real freight. So hopefully there should be... Wait a minute. Oh, there we go. Lovely.
Great Britain has a collection of varied landscapes and countryside to rival anywhere else in the world.
And the best way to see it is to walk.
And we are here to provide some ideas and inspiration. We are the team that walks around Britain, and we've been discovering some of the most interesting and varied short walks, from the Highlands of Scotland to the Channel Islands. We've been there discovering the best walking Britain has to offer. If you thought walking was just about mountains, then think again. We've got walks in the countryside, along water and the coast, through woodlands and forests, up fells and hills, around historic buildings and our industrial past, and not forgetting walks through our towns and cities. Walks to do by yourself, in a group, or with your family, be they the human or canine kind. Along the way, we'll be telling fascinating stories about the landscape, its people and its history. It's all designed to get you out and inspired to experience it for yourselves.
Welcome to Walks Around Britain.
Oh, it's lovely, Andrew. You got me in the mood now.
Well, that's it. Exactly. That's what you should do.
So that's it. Walks around Britain. There we go. Right. So, yeah. Thanks. So that's you. We're going to skip on to this picture now because otherwise the video will kind of loop in the background and we won't get a word in edgeways. I think the sound's back to normal. Everyone. Sorry, the video is a little bit quiet. I think for a few reasons, mostly PowerPoint. It always has videos automatically at 2/3 volume for some reason. So don't worry about that. Anyway, yeah, thanks for sending that through, Andrew. Yeah, it gives a nice feel for what you get up to in, well, it's not your spare time, it's in your full time.
Yeah, this is the job. This is, but I mean, my interest in railways sort of started because my dad, my granddad, my dad's dad was worked at Sheffield Masborough, so he was an LMS guy, and my dad, for his I suppose because he wanted better locomotives, he would always he'd cycle from Rotherham to Rosington, just south of Doncaster, to see the LNER. So there was always tension between those two because my dad was an LNER man and wanted to see the A4s and the A3s and all those.
Yeah.
And of course, my granddad was working with Black Fives at Masborough. So that didn't work very well. There was always tensions, and the tensions lasted all the way throughout life. Really, it was quite amazing how those divides were quite entrenched. And so in my earliest memories, really, are going on Donny Station with a bottle of Tizer and sandwich, and sitting at the end of a rain-soaked platform, watching Deltics, and happy times, seeing these beasts. I think the only two that I didn't see St Paddy or Nimbus. I think they'd gone by the time I'd started to do my spotting. But all the rest of them, I mean, you're going through and you're seeing, oh no, it's Fife and Forfar Yeomanry yet again. There always seems to be one that haunts you. I don't know if that anybody else seems that. I always that was the one that was always there. 5 and 4, 5.
See, I'm lucky enough that I've managed to see a Deltic in mainline service, weirdly, because for a very short period of time, Deltics, I don't know whether it was Alcidian or whichever it was, I'm not enough of a proper Greiser to know which, to remember which. Anyway, one of the Deltics was running aluminium trains up and down the West Highland line. Yes. And I tell you, that's quite an iconic scene. Hearing that kind of that impressive sort of bubbling of the Napier sort of Deltic engine, and you think, well, what is that noise? It sounds so familiar. It's and it's a Deltic absolutely hammering it, but not moving very fast, going up the hill over the pass, but at Tyndrum, and that was quite something. So you and I both have seen Deltics in operation, although perhaps not in quite the same level of anger for me.
Yeah. Well, my time was you'd still be able to get into a cab. I mean, a driver would still let you, as a young boy, get into a cab and sit down. And this is a time when you used to still have time at a station for that kind of activity. Oh, and number plate rubbing, of course, was a big thing. You'd get a huge sheet of paper and you'd rub the number plate, the nameplate. Sorry.
Well, that's quite wholesome and quite nice. But nowadays we have, with my PTI safety hat on, I go, stay behind the bloody yellow line, please. And
also, it's all stick-on nameplates now for a lot of operators. So that's not, you can't rub them.
Yeah. So so here we've got I don't know anything about kettles. So this is what is this? What is this, a 060 LNY steam train?
I think this is sort of highlighting, I think, one of the great benefits of closed railways, isn't it? I mean, I think the fact that we've got so many heritage lines now in the UK is because we closed lots of railways down. And I think as a catalyst for the whole preservation movement, I'm talking about the main full-sized standard gauge. I think we have to look at the reason why we've got so much stuff preserved is because we closed so many lines down and allow them to reopen. So I think we have to look at, when we're talking about beaching and all of those kinds of things, you've got to look at that in the round. And so actually, was beaching an indirect consequence of beaching was, all of these locomotives and this stock still available, still there for us to enjoy today.
Yeah, and it's obviously I meant to put a slide up actually with reminding us why we don't say beaching anymore, why we just say mid 20th century railway closures. Yeah. But it's a very good point, and the various closures, the huge amount of mileage that we closed. A huge amount of it was pointless, like it was purposeless railway that just
pointless when it was open, wasn't it?
Yeah, quite a lot. Unfortunately, there's a really interesting academic paper that explores how inefficient our entire railway system was because it was built with very little, with zero strategic oversight, and as a result of that, you got a huge amount of duplication. You got a huge amount of human capital being wasted on, both real capital and human capital being wasted on railways that were basically pointless. So the upshot of that is if you close them, people can play with them. And indeed, we have a very certainly from a pre-COVID perspective, a very vibrant heritage railway sector, which is a major source of tourist revenue. We're talking about billions a year of tourist income. The challenge, even before COVID is, I fear we're going to lose a lot of a few heritage railways post-COVID because it's been a very difficult operating environment for them. And they haven't been able to get access and do things, and a lot of their the workforce of heritage railways is already, high risk from a COVID perspective. But even before COVID, there was a challenge with heritage railways that because there were so many, lines to use and reopen as heritage lines, then actually there's a shortage. The engineering skills gap applies also to heritage lines, and so there is a shortage of skills for the big railway, let alone for the little railways as well. But nevertheless, I love them. I adore heritage lines, and with my engineering hat on, in some cases they've preserved a right of way that could be quite useful because whilst a lot of railway closures were sensible, for every sensible railway closure you can probably find one that was a bad move with the benefit of hindsight, of course. So it is heritage railways. Yeah, we've got the benefit of a fair few heritage railways within reasonably close distance from us. We've got the North York Moors is quite close. There are a couple around Leeds. There's Bolton Emsey. What else have we got?
And of course the Keighley-Worth Valley. I think the Keighley-Worth Valley was the first one to reopen.
In and around in terms of standard gauge?
Yeah, because I think it was closed in 67, I think. 66, 67, and it reopened in some way in 68.
Interesting. Okay.
So I think there'll probably be some chatters around.
Yeah, go on, chat. Tell us which is the first standard gauge heritage railway.
I'm fairly certain that was the first, if not the first, one of the very first. And of course, I think it's one of the very few that's a complete branch to be saved as well, as opposed to part of a line. Like the North York Moors is obviously a part of a line, isn't it? That goes down to Pickering. It would continue down to Malton.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. We're already nattering away, but that's kind of the point. And I'm sure we'll do another chat on heritage railways at some point because there's much to talk about. David Shearers reckons that the Bluebell was first. Gordon Dudman also confirms Bluebell. But Michael, so it was 10. Middleton. Okay, Middleton is an interesting one because Middleton is the oldest extant bit of railway line that's still in use. It was a railway back in 17 something or other. Middleton in Leeds, right, opposite the Hunslet Railway Works, if I'm not mistaken. I was doing some surveying there a few years back. Anyway, but that's different to heritage railway. So yes, Middleton is very old, but in terms of heritage railway, Bluebell seems to be.
I think the Bluebell was first, and then the Keighley-Worth Valley.
But it's certainly David confirms
very
it was one of
early
the
on.
first. Yeah, definitely, he was one of the first, sorry, David confirms it was one of the first, and it does have a fantastic mixture of sort of industrial and countryside. I always think the Worth Valley line, basically, it was the one that for me it's in the original Railway Children, so
Yes.
that for me is why I like it. Although I've never been on it, I've never ridden on it.
It's a lovely line, and of course the interesting thing about it is that you can do the Worth Way, which wheels its way round the railway. So at certain points you can, if you time your timetable and you walk correctly, you can get to various points where you can actually see the line and see
Nice, yeah.
train passing. So it's a very nice line to sort of film at. It's brilliant.
Yeah, it is. It is lovely. When I was growing up, my favourite was the Speyside Railway because the views across to the Cairngorms were second to none. I think it's been run down a little bit of late. Sorry to everyone in the SRPS, but who's watching. I don't know if anyone is actually. But actually, David, you might be a member of the SRPS. In any case, they've run down the Speyside a little bit, possibly because they've been pushing forwards towards Aviemore, and everything else has sort of come second to that. But in any case, it's a beautiful railway. And then I've done work on. I set out the platforms on the at Manual on the the Bowness and Kinneil Railway. So I spent a lot of time. So I kind of learned my railway ropes on the Bowness and Kinneil line, and I was reassembling S&C and swapping out sleepers and generally getting my hands dirty there when I was a student. Anyway, heritage railways. And we could talk for hours about this, but let's. Oh, in fact, there's another picture of a heritage railway. Lovely job.
Yeah, well, that's the Keighley Worth Valley as well, and that is if you know your Railway Children film, that's the scene at the end, as from the bridge as the train goes off into the distance.
Yes.
So you can. The great thing about that, and again, it's brilliant when you're with children to go walking because you can go. I think it's brilliant to go on the train and then you can walk back to certain stations, and then catch the train back again. But it's really nice to have that knowledge of being able to show your kids or your grandkids where bits of it were filmed. So if you watch the film first, then you go. It's a way of getting kids out and enjoying the outdoors and conning them into thinking that they enjoy walking.
Yeah, and I remember as a kid very much if there was a walk that involved hopping on and hopping off the Speyside Railway, because that was the one that was reasonably local to us in Inverurie, then I was always even happier about a walk. So heritage railways are certainly an upside of having closed railway lines. I think most people can probably agree about that one. But what else can we do with our closed railway line? Well, here is a map. You've given me a map, Andrew. What's this of? Tell me about it.
Well, this is a map of a lovely route called the Transpennine Trail, and it's a 207-mile walking and cycling, and in some cases horse riding route from the west coast up to the east coast, or the east coast to the west coast, depending on which way you're going. But it's great because it's mainly on old railway lines, and there's different spurs. There's a spur that goes down to Chesterfield and goes up. There's a spur that comes down to York.
Bits of the Midland, bits of the old Midland. Some of the Great Central in there. There's the Hornsey line, which I walked a year ago, I think. What else? You've got. There's a fair few bits and pieces there.
Yeah, and if you go to the next slide, the really important bit of it for railway enthusiasts such as ourselves is this certain bit called the Woodhead line, of which obviously we have many debates, don't we, of people saying, well, we should reopen it. And
which spoiler alert, that's next week's episode. We're going to talk about Woodhead next week.
We're not going to be talking about that too much, but the idea is that this is another great use of old closed railways and the track bed. And again, we should really, I think, with the benefit of hindsight, we should have really have put things into place so that we'd have preserved, I suppose, or retained the use of the track beds for a lot of these railways. From the point of view of, obviously, the big debate about Woodhead is that if you did try to do something with it now, there's so much realignment that you'd have to do.
Yeah, it would cost. I mean, to reopen Woodhead would cost more than burying a new route. Yeah. So at which point you go, well,
because of what you've built over, and
exactly.
it's astonishing what there is has been built.
And the alignment, we'll talk. Of course, we'll talk about Woodhead next time. But it is a very interesting point, and I think you raise a very valid. Yes, I say that a lot of railway lines were pointless, and closing them was a good thing. One thing that I feel very strongly about is that none of those track beds should have been built on. Even if they're ridiculous railways that just make no sense whatsoever, those rights of way should not have had roads put on them. They should not have had housing estates put on them, industrial estates. They should have been protected, because if nothing else, they provide incredibly good active travel corridors. So cycling, walking, horse riding if you're that way inclined. All these sorts of, generally railways are straight, so they generally provide useful straight-ish connections between nodes, even if those happen to be things that weren't very usefully served by a railway. Actually, from a cycling perspective, brilliant. So I think one thing that is criminal is that the track bed was sold off. The trouble is, at the time, British Rail paid for a lot of new rolling stocks by selling off a lot of these assets. So it required us to have government thinking differently at the time. And again, it's a benefit of hindsight thing. Like, much as it was stupid that we got rid of and sort of released for pretty shoddy prices, released some of these assets. So these kind of land assets, the rights of way. At the time, the idea was that there was no use for them. There was no use for them.
There was no use for them.
Whereas now,
the whole of the Transpennine Trail cost about £60 million to put into place. So it's the catchment area of the trail. When you're talking about sort of Hull, Selby, Goole, you've got Doncaster, Barnsley, Rotherham, Sheffield, Chesterfield, Leeds, all on our side of the Pennines, and then of course there are other towns
all
available.
All of Manchester and Liverpool on the other side.
Yeah. So you've got
millions.
The ability to link people together by using mainly old railway lines, but it also goes along some canal towpaths and some new routes as well. But it's a brilliant way of going about it, and I think this is again something that we could look at is the walking and cycling aspect of old railway lines has been a boom. Sustrans, the National Cycle Network. There's I think about just over 16,500 miles of the National Cycle Network. A good proportion of that is on old railway lines, and part of the Transpennine Trail is part of the National Cycle Network too, because it's like you say, it's absolutely perfect places to go walking, perfect places to go on a bike ride. So we really ought to have again looked at this and thought long and hard about the fact that we should have kept these assets for the greater good and said, right, well, let's put some more railways. If we're not going to have these as railways, they may make sense as walking corridors, as cycling corridors, and a lot of that has proved the case. I mean, the very first bit of the National Cycle Network that was opened was between Bath and Bristol, again an old railway line. So
and that's very, very popular. Like, that is an incredibly busy commuter route. Like, we're talking, that's it carries more people than the M5 does per hour. That cycleway. That's the level. People don't grasp how good cycleways are at moving people around. It's And
the investment that's needed to put these things into place, by the time is minimal when you're looking at the cost benefits analysis of the whole thing. It's so fantastic, walking and cycling.
It's so the chat, so John Christoph asks a very interesting question in the chat. He says, how do we ensure that rail rights of way don't get converted to road in the future, especially when existing roads parallel old railways and locals demand that the road be widened? Well, I think it's the sort of thing that you could find an MP who you reckon could champion a bit of legislation or a change to planning, and just find an MP and then advertise the fact that MP is going to champion a bit of legislation to change the planning rules that no railway track beds can be used in roads. So basically, they're untouchable. Just to change the planning rules would be a good start.
We're going to seriously look at these sorts of things. We're going to have a similar issue with the old RAF bases that we're selling off, because who knows what we might need them for in the future. And once they've been sold off and repurposed for other things, we might, who knows in 20 years, 30, 40 years time, if we, there might be some people saying, do you know what? If we hadn't have sold them off, we could have done X, Y, and Z with them or whatever. It's that sort of thing. You need to look at these things in the round. And of course, again, we've all discussed it before. It was a different era. We railways were in decline, so we needed to get rid of loads of them. And walking and cycling and active travel wasn't the sorts of things that many people had in mind, really.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's an interesting one. It's unfortunately, it speaks to the wider problem in the UK, is that we have a fixation with selling off publicly owned things and land, and that's not just the current party, to be honest. It's just a long-term feeling in this country that actually things are better off owned by private individuals rather than as for all of us to share and enjoy and make use of. But anyway, that's another story, isn't it? Really. What else? Let's see what's going on in the chat. There's some people. So David Shepherd said there's also the parliamentary petitions website. If you put that's one route you could go for. Yeah, that's true. Sarah Noble is pointing out that RAF Burn is a better location for Yorkshire Airport than Yeadon. Yeadon being Leeds Bradford, right? The old Avro factory at Yeadon, right?
Which, but actually, the claim to having a Yorkshire airport is definitely better with Robin Hood.
Yeah, I was going to say I like Robin Hood, and Robin Hood will be brilliant if they do a bit of jiggery-pokery with the railways. Yeah. I mean, they could realign the East Coast Main Line to have an East Coast Main Line Parkway station.
There is
sort of half a plan for that.
The interesting thing, though, if you go back to when would it have been the franchise round of 2000 or something along those lines? Do anybody remember Virgin's audacious bid for a high-speed East Coast Main Line?
Oh yeah,
HS. That was going to have a station over that way, and that was even before the airport was open. So, what could we have had if the Strategic Rail Authority had decided to go for a Virgin East Coast line? Then,
yeah,
well, interesting.
Yeah, Virgin didn't have a very good track record of getting infrastructure work to hook up. In fairness, so I don't know. Well, who knows what might have happened there? So there we go. Yeah, Yeadon's useless. It's at the top of the hill. There are plans to rail connect it. They're building a station. Anyway, right. We'll do Leeds Bradford as an episode because there's literally an hour and a half of content in how ridiculous.
Just saying how desperately bad it is.
Yeah, it's rubbish. Absolute rubbish. I flew out of there once before. And I've never done it before, and my experience was miserable. The location, it's impossible to get there by public transport.
The bus is going through a housing estate, isn't it? I mean, that's the whole
rubbish. It's rubbish. Although, hello to Alex Priestley's parents who live nearby there. Hello, Karen and Colin. Alex being a previous guest. Anyway, right, I've digressed horribly. Sorry, Andrew. There we go. It's a picture of the Transpennine Trail. I can use my eyes there.
That was I can't remember which way round I think that's looking towards the east. Yeah, it is. It's walking towards the east. But of course, that would have had 76ers running along that at some point.
Oh yeah, which bit are we? Where are we in this bit?
That's just near, not too far away from the Langsett Reservoir. So it's east of Dunford Bridge on the Yorkshire side of the tunnel. Yeah, it's a great place. It's a great walking, and if you go there on a nice weekend, you certainly couldn't socially distance at the moment because it's packed.
Yeah. But it's just a great picture for showing how fantastic these assets are. Like this was a busy bit of railway in its time. When there was coal traffic and steel traffic, it was a busy bit of railway, and it's such a good, it's a fantastic cycleway. David Shearers points out very astutely, from his own experience as well, that local councils have a role in this. So after Airdrie Bathgate closed in the 70s, the local council, so I don't know which bit of West Lothian Council, whatever the council was then, made the track bed into a cycle path to preserve the route, which meant that the line could be reopened relatively easily in 2010.
Well,
Yeah,
we're coming on to something like that in a bit.
Oh, excellent.
But the interesting, I think what's interesting is that there's been obviously a very big connection between walking, especially walking more than cycling, but walking and railways. You know, I mean, there's going back down to the LNER, especially had rambling booklets that you could buy. Dr. David Turner has posted some nice pictures of them on Twitter a while ago, and it's just that those sort of camping caravan coaches, that sort of all the aspect of getting out, and so many of the classic posters, of course, were promoting destinations to go. Ironically, most of the places that were promoting are now, the railways are now closed, and the lines that you were going on to go to these places are actually the actual places that you're going to walk on now. There they are, the walking routes.
So, yeah, we've got some nice chat going on. Hello, Joel. Welcome to Rail Natter. So my favourite cycleway that I have cycled lots and lots of times, more than any other, I think. Although maybe the one near me is, so I'm right next to the Derwent Valley Light Railway, or the former Derwent Valley Light Railway, so I do cycle that a lot because it's now my commute, or it was. So ignoring that, it was the Tarka Trail down in North Devon, which is one that I know very, very well.
Very popular.
Very, very popular, and it's a fantastic cycleway. It's in a beautiful corner of North Devon. That's where my dad's family hail from, and hence Dennis. And it's just such a wonderful cycle. So you can cycle from my grandparents just north of Knoll, north of Bronton. You can cycle from through Bronton right the way down to Meath, which is through Barnstaple, Bideford, and right the way down through Torrington, and then back. It's around about 70 miles. But because it's on a railway, it's easily doable in a day, and it's just terrific. Although it's another good example of where people don't understand future need, because that railway should the Barnstaple the railway, the Tarka line as it's branded, that runs up to Barnstaple Junction, should really have continued, or they should have linked it up to Bronton. The bit to Bronton should have remained open because Bronton is so busy. Anyone who knows that corner is. Anyway, that's a chat for another day. But
well, the other, I mean, if we go on to the next slide, we've got another example of
lovely
of how we can use these structures, and you know, going down to some lovely television pieces of railway architecture. Has there been a series about that recently?
I feel like there might have been. Yeah, I don't know who was involved in that.
That's fulfilling a very good need there. But there's so many of these structures that are just stunning that you can now go and walk on or cycle on. And is there anybody who's having a guess at where that one is?
Oh, yeah, go on. So we've got about a 30-second latency. Yeah. Guess the viaduct. Here we are.
Guess the viaduct. There's another side of it as well. If you go on to the next one, I think that's just another side of it too. I think I put 2 in. But there's that one's a very. Well, I think it's little known actually. Not many people know about it.
So this is the thing. I'd love to go and visit a lot of this stuff. The thing is, yourself, the White Wicks, hello Paul and Rebecca, if you're watching, they all do this. It's a niche that so the only context in which I'm going to find myself a need to actually create content around these places, other than cycling them for my own interest, is if they're actually useful to be reopened as railway infrastructure. And I feel like a few of these, some of them ought to be, but quite a few of them aren't. And they are wonderful as walking and cycling connections. Here we go.
This one certainly isn't. I mean, again, it was part of the mania. There's no real need for this one to reopen, which actually is brilliant because it should be stayed as it is, as a walking and cycling route. But if anybody got it yet?
We have David is going ? Near Doncaster.
Oh, very good. Yes.
Conisborough Viaduct, facing away from the castle. There we go. Nice one. Tempest Malice. Good work. Lovely job.
It connected the Great Northern, Great Eastern to the Hull and Barnsley for some strange and bizarre reason. And but now, I mean, it's I think I'm right in saying it's taller than Woodhead and it's longer than Woodhead, and has the reckon of something around the quantity of about 15 million bricks involved in its structure. And it's just amazing,
So we're around Donny. you're
Yeah.
blessed with a huge number of duplicated railway lines because it was coal central. There's a huge amount of freight, and that's the reason why. If you go into Rail Map Online, just Google Rail Map Online, and it has all the old railway lines mapped out with OpenStreetMap behind it. It's a brilliant resource, and you just see the scale of railway infrastructure around, mostly to the the west of Doncaster, sorry. So like Mexborough and towards Sheffield, the whole of South Yorkshire is just completely netted in railway lines, and a lot of them, quite a few of them, were built to pretty decent standards. Flat ruling grades, 1 mile radius minimum curves, and with some, as we've got here, incredibly heavy engineering that were duplicating other lines. If they, it's incredible. But this gives us these incredible assets. I mean, this bit of viaduct, it's just stunning. It's staggering. It's a huge bit of infrastructure that's just sat there that can be used for cycling. It's great. So we've had a question which I can answer actually, which is from, where are we? John Christoph is asking us to comment on the engineering requirements and constraints on converting a double-track railway into a walking cycle path and a single-track rail line. So I can tell you that it's quite hard to do that because it's not impossible, but it's quite hard to do it because railways are the width requirements of a railway are certainly more than they were when they were built, so particularly when one is closed, reopening a line single track is a lot wider, and it's not because trains have got wider, they haven't, because we've got a restrictive loading gauge. It's that we need more space to allow things like safe walking routes, extra space for signals, passive provision for electrification, all these things, and they're sensible things, but it means that you end up with a wider space that your railway needs to fill up, which doesn't leave you much left afterwards for a cycleway.
Well,
it's not impossible, though.
Well, you say that, and that's all true, but only if you're thinking about a certain width of railway.
Oh, I see where you're going with this. I see. So we'll hold that thought. We'll hold that thought until Andrew brings up the point later on, and we can do some engineering debate.
The interesting thing also, I mean, when we're looking at the connection between railways and walking, is you're looking at, if we go back to the classic of the Settle and Carlisle route, all of those stations on the intermediate between Settle and Carlisle, all of those were closed in 1970. And in 1974, it was the Yorkshire Dales Authority who subsidised some trains to bring walkers from Leeds and from Carlisle down into the national park again.
Yep.
Effectively unauthorised reopening of those stations, and it was that sort of, I suppose, guerrilla walking type of thing that actually brought more people in. And then when Ron Davis came in and started to actually do all the stuff to effectively reopen it and promote it, we then got all of the new, all of that stuff that came through from there, and we then obviously saw that actually if you actually put trains on that are timed when people want to use them, people actually do use them. As opposed to one train a day, and then BR says, well, we can't run the service because nobody wants to use it. Well, so I think that walkers have been walking as well. Has been quite an interesting link to those sorts of stations, to those sorts of routes that are kept open.
And people talk about scale and say, but you can't keep a railway open just for walkers and cyclists. Well, I'll beg to differ on that front. Yes, the West Highland Line does receive substantial subsidy, but if it was not profitable to do so, there would not be attaching an old bit of 153 onto the back of sprinters to put bikes in.
Yeah.
It is that railway line is thronged with walkers and cyclists. Particularly in peak time, you can't. It's standing room only in those sprinters going up the West Highland Line, and that's a line I know well from doing a lot of hill walks when I was a student. But there are lots of railways that that serve exactly that function. Fantastic use for tourists, for walkers, for people generally out for adventure. And the north of England, across the north, there are plenty of them. Wales, the southeast as well. Lots of lovely railway lines, perfect for that. Right, let's have a look. Obviously, the two-track thing is you can have a heritage line and a walking path, You can have a cycle. I'm not saying it's impossible. The challenge is the challenge is sort of having enough space for a really wide, decent cycle route on the structures, particularly. But it's doable. I think David Shearer's just pointed out the Tweed Viaduct has a cycleway next to the single track Borders Railway, but obviously that should be doubled soon, so they might have to reroute the cycleway somewhere. Anyway, next slide. In fact, that's the same shot, right? That's you.
The shot, yeah, that's me, and that's the.
Someone's got a UAV with a camera attached to it to do your filming, right?
That's the idea. Well, that's the Conisbrough Viaduct. Epic scenes there that you can walking into the sky, really.
It's just staggering. What an incredible! And there are so many bits of infrastructure like this that are just sat collecting dust.
Yeah, and that is, as I say, that's just just east of Doncaster, west of Doncaster. Yeah, so and again, very very little, few people know about it. Although until now, when more people will go now.
Indeed, we've got 57 people watching, and they all know about the Conisbrough Viaduct, and every single one of them is now going to be waiting, looking at the clock until lockdown lifts to get to the Conisbrough Viaduct. So we can have a rail natter meet on the Conisbrough Viaduct when lockdown lifts. How's that? Right. That's a lovely shot. That, and I need to get down on my bike there because I could probably get there and back without too much pain actually from where I am. That's one to aim for. Anyway, there's a map. The Monsell Trail.
So this is the Monsell Trail, and again another great piece of cycle and walking. Again, and a lot of people mistakenly think that the Monsell Trail, this line was closed by beaching. It wasn't. It was a Barber Castle original closure. It wasn't even in the list. I don't think on. Yeah, so 8.5 miles of cycling. This has done the Peak District National Park an awful amount of good because it brings this. I think it's right. Apart from Chatsworth House, it's the one thing, the next single thing that brings the most amount of viewers. I'm thinking viewers, most amount of visitors. That's the word I'm looking for. Where's my earphones? Come out of my head. To the national park, so it's brilliant. Cyclists, again, you struggle to find a place to be on it, and the next slide is the famous.
So as I say, the geography for people not familiar with the Monsell Trail. So this is on the River Wye. Where is it nearest in the Peak District?
Bakewell.
It's near Bakewell. Okay, yeah. So this is on the form. What's the railway that it used to?
Well, it was the Midland added eventually latter part, didn't they? And it's that sort of the national park now are trying to build a link all the way around, so it's going to be like one continuous cycle network.
Ah, lovely. But does the line continue at the other side that they could make use of?
It was part of the. I think the other side forms part of the Peak Rail.
Yeah. Yeah, so Peak Rail at one end. Yeah, okay, yeah. So it is a bit... but it's not impossible, though.
Down to Derby.
James Bailey is pointing out that the trail has been fantastic since they opened up the tunnels. That's another one that I need to go... To be honest, it'd be great if there was if only someone could create a list of all of the railway cycle routes, and then someone else could tick them off. That'd be great. Also the home of Bakewell pudding, Bakewell tart, technically, or maybe there is a Bakewell pudding.
Well, there's two, isn't there? There's the pudding and the tart.
Oh, really? Okay.
Trained to speak to each other.
Anyway, sorry. There it is. Another absolutely stunning bit of railway infrastructure.
So that's Monsell Head Viaduct.
Yeah.
And of course, there's the double viaducts at the other end as well, at the west end, which you need to go and have a look at, which is brilliant.
It's just so my favourite bit of the Tarka Trail. Well, I don't know, not my favourite, but one of my favourite bits of the Tarka Trail was where the viaducts would north of Torrington, where the viaducts would crisscross over the river, and it was always it's just such a stunning bit because you've got that. It's just proof of the way that railways engage with and become part of the landscape in a way that roads, unless they're abandoned, roads never do.
No,
they never do.
They always seem to be an intruder, don't they? Whereas
they do.
If you stand on Batty Moss and you look at the Ribblehead and you look at that and you think that's always been here. It's as old as the mountains. It just feels like it should be there, and it feels like it it'd been, you know, the landscape would miss something if it wasn't there.
Yeah, yeah.
And the same with Monsell Head there. You just look at that and you think it's always been there, and it always should be there. And the amazing thing is you've just come out of a tunnel. You've just come out of Headstone Tunnel, which is I think it's the longest on the route. So you've just walked through the tunnel and come out the other side, and you've got this, you know, this epic view that you see over the River Wye. And, you know, depending on what the weather conditions are like, you know, you get this massive inrush of wind coming over this viaduct, and it's just, you know, you think, I am alive. This is brilliant.
You can, particularly when they're quiet. So if you're doing it in the evening, maybe when it's not got so many families out and about, you can pick up a decent pace on a railway cycle route. And because you can see at good distance, it's not unsafe to do so. So you can really pick up a good speed. And you'd feel like you're chuffing along, you feel like you're at the front of a train. On the Tark Trail, when I was on my on the Blue Beast, which has got nice slick tyres, and it's kind of, I can get a decent pace on it. When I'm really pushing, it's just, you've got the wind through your hair and just and a railway alignment in front of you. It's brilliant, under your own steam, literally. It's brilliant. Right, that's a lovely shot, that one. Thanks, Andrew, for sharing. That's really brilliant. Another map. So I'm on to 50k, and I see many railways on here, including some abandoned ones. But you've drawn a line.
Yes.
Tell us about the line you've drawn.
Well, this is actually another thing that we could do more of. I don't think there's many examples of this, but this one is in Lee, in the borough of Wigan, and I've got some flies flying around, which is why I'm flicking the camera. This is the Lee guided busway, and it's an old railway line. It was closed in 1969. Now, we were talking before, and this is how Natta works, isn't it? We ended up talking about how we could preserve the track bed. And actually what Wigan Council did, is they put the track bed into the unitary development plan. And they made it so that it couldn't be built on. So it was kept. The Wigan side of it, I think Salford did something completely different, but the Wigan side of it was kept from the point of view of being able to reopen it.
Yeah.
Now that didn't happen, and eventually it was used as if we go to the next slide, we can have a look at a nice picture. There it is. And what's happened now is it's a guided busway.
So the guided busways is what we're hearing in the chat. But you're about to tell us the opportunities it has offered.
Well, there's some there's great opportunities, because obviously, you know, this is how costs work out. That it was £66 million to make a 4.5 mile guided busway. Now, I think that also includes the associated cycle path and horse riding and the walking path as well. But the interesting thing is that's given a brilliant lift to the local economy. I think Lee's one of those great statistics of a very large town that doesn't have any rail connection. So it's given a lift into Manchester. It's very well, it used to be anyway, a very well popular, well patronised bus route. And the cycle and the walking and horse riding. There's plenty. When we were there filming, there was lots of people doing horse riding. I don't know where they get the horses from in Greater Manchester, but there we are. But it's fantastic, and it's, I think, something like this, although it's buses, you know, it's as near to a train as the bus is ever going to get, and it's a useful use of this kind of a corridor.
It's an interesting one, isn't it? So 66 million, you say, and so that's probably about the cost of reopening it as a railway from scratch, anyway. So it isn't. It's I don't, on paper, I don't fully hate on guided busways. The trouble is, in the UK, we generally implement them where there should be a railway. That's the only trouble. So I don't mind guided busways if they're used properly, but generally in the UK we use it where we ought to be putting a railway. Cambridge is another perfect example, but this one ought to be Metrolink. But anyway, the thing is, it has preserved the right of way, so it can be smashed to bits and dug up and replaced with something useful, or more useful, at a later date. But again, as you say, there's a former track bed, and we've got more facilities for active travel again. Guided busways on former track beds in the UK, yeah, I'm generally a thumbs down on it, but it offers us something useful in the future. We've protected the right. It's a way to protect the right of way.
Well, I think that's interesting, and it's interesting that the council had the foresight. I don't know when they put it in the development plan to protect it, but they had this in mind, and that a bit of foresight again, which is often sadly lacking in this country, isn't it?
Yeah, indeed. So someone's just asked what the cost of putting this in as a railway would be. So you said 66 million to put the guided busway in.
Yeah, that's yeah.
It would cost.
That's
so
2016.
Yeah, okay. So I'd put this at today's prices. I'd put this at around about 90 million to from scratch put in a double track railway through here. So bearing in mind that it's borrowing anyway, and you get a return on it, it should still be a railway, really. But anyway, whatever. You could use tram train or
again,
something.
And again, the tram is the way. I like rail of some description is a great way of using these things, and sometimes it is the cost benefit analysis doesn't work any greater for these kind of things as it does for putting rail in, does it? That's the thing.
Yeah, well, but that opens up the can of worms about web tag, which is probably another rail matter. A few people might be able to chat about web tag. Anyway, tell us all about transport appraisal guidelines and how useless they are in the UK. Anyway, right, next slide. How are we doing time? Oh, I know what this is. This is have I put the sound off on this? I can't remember. I think I might not have put the sound off, which means that we can chat over it anyway, Andrew. But we've come full circle again because we opened with the Selby diversion, and I've cropped. Hopefully, I've cropped this into. Oh, here we go. Some snazzy CGI. I think you're about to duck off the railway with your dog.
I'm about to race off because there's a.
That's it. You're going to get run over by a
York Selby Doncaster local train coming past.
That's it.
This is a bit from the program that we because we want to obviously try to do more things like this, and because we're obviously rail nuts, we want to make it proper.
You can have some fun with it. Yeah. So there's a few interesting. So that's an interesting one. So there are a few interesting points. The first thing you'll notice is that is a bridge that has been lifted for electrification.
Yeah.
And you might ask, why does that happen? Why has that bridge been lifted for electrification when it was closed for to be rerouted by the Selby diversion? Well, that's because Roger Bastin, who is still alive, I'm pleased to say, and was the route civil engineer, made a point of having all of his bridges renewed with... oh, you're chatting. Oh, maybe I did mute this because I can't hear it. That's probably for the best, Andrew, because we can chat to each other. For anyone who's wondering what on earth is going on, this is a planet. There's like a planet along this trail between York and Rickhall, which is the route that hasn't been gobbled up by the A19. And this is the former. So this is the old East Coast Main Line. So it's a kind of a rare situation where very much oh no, crikey, that's a thing happening again. It's your CGI trains whizzing along back and forth on the East Coast Main Line. Anyway. That's quite nice. I like your authentic sign. That's quite good. I'll give you points for that. Anyway, so the East Coast Main Line. It's very rare for a major main line in the UK to be closed entirely. Ooh. Oh, right. So Joel Hardy is asking, what's this program called, and where can I find it? This is Walks Around Britain, hosted by Andrew. It's his program.
Yeah.
Yes, and you can find it. I'll tell you what. I'll post a link to how you can subscribe and watch in the description. This is Neyburn Swingbridge, if I'm not mistaken. I was walking there fairly recently, and they've got a sculpture of a man with a bicycle doing some fishing, or a person with a bicycle doing some fishing, and you can see it. There it is. It's a bit weird, but it's fine. It's quite interesting because this is a pretty major bit of infrastructure that used to have trains running along it at a fair old lick. They used to, in fact, it had HSTs running on it for a while.
Yes, yeah.
Which is strange to think. Yeah. No, it's bizarre to think that now it's just us cycling back and forth, right? Michael, we will do a rail natter on urban transport and metros, and the lack of them in the UK. I promise. We will do that very soon. People are loving the CGI trains as well.
Thank you.
It's not alternate history, Mike. This is what it used to look like. It's not so much alternative history as what the railway was doing before this wasn't a cut so much as a railway that would have collapsed without being moved elsewhere, because the Selby coalfield was open up underneath.
Well, yeah, the NCB I think gave BR some quite.
They gave them about 300 million quid, I think, to
quite financial incentive, and I think just to bypass Selby and the swing bridge, and that was something that BR wanted to do as well, wasn't it? So it was a win-win for everybody, really.
Yeah. Well, you've got a nice little mixed goods going on there.
Mixed goods.
Look at that.
Mixed goods.
Anyway, I think this neatly sort of closes our chat, I think. I mean, I can't remember how much more. I think there's a bit more video. I can't remember when it finishes. But we can natter along. Oh, there we go. There's the swing bridge with some railway on it, and now it's gone. And even the smoke there. Love the job. Anyway, so yeah, everyone should go and watch Walks Around Britain. It's lovely. Nope, you're making your way back onto the cycle path again. Anyway, no, thanks for joining us, Andrew. That's been brilliant. I've really enjoyed it. Is there any other bits and pieces anything in your notes you've not managed to tell us about?
Well, I was just saying, I think the other thing was just a sort of the curveball about when you're saying about putting a cycle path alongside a single track railway line. You know, we don't have to. Who's to say that it has to be standard gauge? You know, could we reopen some of these lines with a cycle path and a walkway and narrow gauge?
Oh, well, I mean, many reasons, but it's an interesting idea, and I think it certainly raises the point that in future, by protecting these rights of way, we have options. I think that's the key point, is that we have options, whether it's, you know, reinstating a heritage line or whether it's reopening it in full like the Airdrie Bathgate. You know, we have options. David Shearers has got a bet on, so we have to keep going for another 13 minutes. No, actually, we're keeping very much to time. Thank you very much.
No, we're running to time. It's me being a program maker. I have to stick to my
You've stuck to the schedule. We're only 2 minutes behind schedule. I think we're doing marvellously, actually. I think the point you raise is it's about opportunity, and if we get rid of these rights of way, there's just no opportunity to do anything. You know, the one of the railways that is desperate for reopening and is being discussed reasonably seriously about reopening is the York to Market Wheaton line, and through to Beverley, to allow you to have a direct York Hull service, because the current York Hull service is rubbish.
Good.
I tell you what, let's go side by side. We've not had enough of Andrew's big face. There we go. Both of us are here. Hello, everyone, and we're bigger again. One of the things so that line is looking at being reopened as reasonably sensibly, although it's still kind of nice words, not anything else, from government. But anyway, the trouble with that line is that lots of the track bed has been lost entirely. You know, you only have to, through York, there's a housing estate built on it. Stamford Bridge, Market Wheaton itself, all these areas, they've got housing estates built on it. And frankly, you're not going to plough a railway through a housing estate. You have to divert the line. Which means in the case of Stamford Bridge that you have to build a new viaduct, because that means you can't reuse the old viaduct over the river. So it's so daft that we've got rid of these rights of way. So look, the tip is local councils open a load of cycleways, because either at the minimum you've got a brilliant cycleway walkway, and at best you've preserved something that can be used for light rapid transit or for heavy rail in the future. Anyway, Andrew. Thanks so much for joining us. It's been brilliant. I've really enjoyed it.
Thank you
very much. That was good fun. I mean, what we're going to be talking about. Oh, I'll tell you what. Let's do this properly. So let's mini faces again. Thanks, Hale, for putting this up as a podcast at the usual places, and thanks to everyone who has joined us via audio only. I know I've got some nice messages from people who've recently been tuning in. Hello, John Stone. You're going to be joining us for a future Rail Natter, whether you like it or not. So thanks for joining us for the podcast. Give me feedback if I'm not describing what's on screen enough. Obviously, I can't make it as good as audio described, but anyway, your feedback is helpful. Next week, there we go. Next week, we've touched on the Woodhead route. We're going to be talking about the Woodhead route next week. We're going to be talking about whether it's a good idea to reopen it. It isn't. Why that isn't the case.
You have to have an open mind, Gareth.
We're going to talk about why it closed in the first place. We're going to talk about all sorts to do with Woodhead. So bring your bad opinions and your shouty voices to throw abuse at me, because it's just going to be me. We're getting back to the basics of Rail Natter. It's just going to be me on my own. which means that we'll have thousands of slides, lots of excessively overdone graphics, and all the rest to boot. So join us next week for that one. As ever, if you want to vote on future themes for us to chat about, or generally be my producer, which quite a few people are now. I think 50 people are Patreons of me now, which is quite something. Anyway, thanks to all of you. That's where to vote on future themes. So come and get involved. Or if you want me to get a better microphone, or indeed buy a new PC, which I've just done, which is over there, which is going to make RailNatter potentially a bit more high tech, then you can also throw me money on PayPal and coffee. So thanks indeed for that. It only really remains to bring Andrew back and say thank you very much, Andrew. And I'll tell you what, we've got maybe 2 or 3 minutes. You don't mind hanging around for 2 or 3 minutes, do you?
Not at all.
Any questions, everyone? I kind of tailed off in paying attention to the chat. Questions? Come and ask questions. We've got condition BSG 75 is talking about the South Tynedale Railway from Alston to Lumley. Which is current. That's a narrow gauge line, isn't it?
Yeah.
It used to be heavy, now narrow gauge. But it's a heritage line still.
And there's the one in Kirklees. No, yeah, Kirklees, isn't there?
Kirklees, yes, that's right.
Yeah, that was narrowed. That's brilliant.
Yeah. There's some people asking about the Queensbury Tunnel. If Paul and Rebecca, or I don't know whether it's Paul and Rebecca, or just Paul or just Rebecca who've joined, hello to whichever one of you or both of you are on, they did a video on the Queensbury, which is very interesting. It was the one they did before they did our HS2 one, actually. And I think Queensbury should be, I think the Highways England have made some, I think they're trying to get away without doing very much, and I don't think you can blame Highways England. You have to blame government for having an obsession with not paying for anything. we just have unfortunately in this country we have a distinct lack of imagination, and Queensbury is a bit of an example of that. Be a wonderful asset for cycling and walking.
That it should. There's no doubt about it.
These things are expensive. They don't exist they don't exist in perpetuum in perfect condition. Tunnels are actually quite maintenance intensive, but it's worth it. You have an asset that people can use. It's very frustrating. Go on. What other questions have we got? Heritage Rail. David Shepherd says heritage railways and cycle routes are great, but shouldn't there be a social responsibility to get small towns back onto the rail network somehow? David, absolutely, and we're going to be talking more about that with a potential new series I'll do when lockdown lifts about transport futures, and I'll talk about, and in fact, not just talk about it in that, but also there's going to be a RailNatter fairly soon about how to do proper crayonisting, how to use your crayons properly, and in that I'll explain how to think about connecting places to the rail network. And not to just think, we should stop thinking about, what railway lines do we reopen? No, forget existing railway lines. They're useful to use, but you need to think about what areas need to be reconnected by rail, and then if there happens to be a bit of railway line you can use, great. But the starting point isn't, let's reopen a line, it's what places need railways.
Yeah, is Grant Shapps listening to this?
Yeah, Grant, my boy G, pay attention. Condition BSG 75 says, ask Andrew if there's one line he'd like to reopen for a cycleway. Good question.
Yeah. Well, the problem, the issue is obviously I've got two sides to me, because as the railway person in me, the rail enthusiast in me, wants all of these lines to be reinstated and have railways on them. But of course, the walker and the outdoor cyclist in me thinks, we need to have them as cycle lanes and being able to walk on them. So I always find old railway lines that are now walking routes and cycling routes I'm quite torn by that, because I think, should we have railways on them? But, the idea of the fact that they've closed in the first place, we just need to keep that corridor open as we've discussed.
Definitely, and there are always there's always an opportunity to widen the corridor to keep the cycling infrastructure there. With a bit of, maybe at some point in the future, Britain's imagination will expand a little, and we'll think, actually, if you want to reinstate the railway, you can put a 2-track railway in there and invest to have a paralleling cycleway. They do this in the Netherlands, in France, in Germany. This is not, we always think we're British exceptionalism to the extreme. You can do both. You can have a double track railway fully electrified with its safe walking routes either side, and a big, wide 4-metre cycleway next to it. You know what? You can do that. Just takes a bit of imagination. Mike Whitcomb asks, hi Mike, could you ask Andrew on the flip side if there are any walks that have been made on old railways that are actually really dull and would be better back as a railway? That's another good question.
There is some of the problems are that you find a route that has now been taken over a little bit of an old railway line and then veers off, and I think that there are some. I think if the answer to the previous question, I was thinking that one of the ones that I would have liked to have walked on, I think, would have been the old track bed which to Carnarvon, which obviously lots now is part of the Welsh Highland, isn't it? But that's But I think there is. But I think there's walkers. Generally speaking, I lots of walkers are basically can be defined as mountains and mint cake people, and by that I mean they like the hills and they like to go to the Lake District and Scotland and Wales, and they're not very interested. There is a subsection of walkers who aren't interested in the easy accessible trails that old railway lines and canal towpaths provide. The issue here is, for me, and then this is what gets me really passionate, is that the vast majority of people who don't go walking, actually, if they knew more about old railway lines and cycling routes that they're safe to go and walk on and canal towpaths and things like this, they'd probably get out more, because they're the ones who are sitting at home thinking, you know what, I don't do this walking thing because it's just about mountains. So if we could promote this kind of easy, accessible walking more, which is what I try to do on my program, as well as the mountains, but to be able to do those things that actually show a nice, easy walk between York and Selby is not difficult to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's what I'm really passionate about.
It's absolutely, and if there's a really interesting initiative about that called the Slowways, which is something that it's worth everyone going in. I'm not going to talk about it now because we have now smashed our time, but go and look up the Slowways, because cycleways are one thing, but actually just having safe, comfortable, quiet, pleasant connecting routes for people to walk between villages, towns and cities is really important.
And it's really interesting that you talked about that as well, because I had a chat this morning with Daniel, who's the guy behind the Slowways, and he's going to be, the interview is going to be on the Walks Around Britain podcast.
Terrific. I was going to say, this is the time to plug things, Andrew. So what things so we'll put you the link to Walks Around Britain in the chat, because I know that it's on, there's a subscription.
You can go to, it's on 20 channels in the UK, so you probably find it by typing it into your search function of your television provider. It's on Amazon, so if you are an Amazon subscriber, you can get it on there. And the nicest way is to subscribe to Walks Around Britain Plus, which is the subscription service, which means you get a new episode every month, and the podcasts are there as well. So
lovely. Nice. Anything else you want to plug? Now's the time.
Oh, I think that's fine. If you could go and see, just do a search for Walks Around Britain, and you'll see all the stuff that I do on the series. So that'd be lovely if you could do that.
And hopefully, at some point, when lockdown lifts and when we've all got inoculations or whatever it is, I'd love to join you on a walk. We've been planning it. Well, we've been sort of half planning it for ages, but I think things somewhat. We both have busy lives, and at some point it shall happen. It shall, and I'm looking forward to it. It only remains to really say cheerio to everyone. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining. Andrew, thank you so much. That's been a really good chat.
It's been excellent.
And we will see you for a chat about Woodhead next week. Cheerio.
Bye.
Cheerio.
Bye.